Our guest today is Sally Curley, an investor relations powerhouse. She's the founder and CEO of Curley Global, her own consulting firm. She spent a decade at Cardinal Health. She was in-house at Genzyme. She's won all sorts of IR awards over the years. I'm Brock Romanek. So Sally, it's all about marketing. You can produce an E&S report, a sustainability report, but if no one reads it, does it matter? Probably not, but maybe it does. It does matter. That's why you're doing it.
It does matter, exactly.
It does matter. So what are examples of what companies are doing to market their reports to institutional investors, for example?
There, I mentioned in an earlier conversation, the website is the first and foremost. It's really the go-to for most stakeholders, including those ESG rating and ranking firms, as well as the proxy advisory firms. So the website's your primary marketing tool on this. I would say, secondly, relevant ESG related disclosures to be included in the proxy CD&A. That's really the board's document. And so that's the opportunity for the board to demonstrate fiduciary oversight of ESG initiatives and fluency with ESG trends, and to highlight not only good governance, but good environmental and stakeholder engagement practices as well. You know, there are companies that are actually conducting ESG specific days. So instead of doing investor days that are focused on the traditional business and goals in the future and the financial results and financial guidance, those companies are now actually doing a half day or a couple hour deep dive into ESG initiatives. So Novartis, for example, just had their ESG day with the investment community. And we know organizations, and we advise on this as well, organizations include ESG initiatives, certainly in their governance outreach presentations that they would send as part of the formal governance outreach program to highlight their environmental stakeholder engagement and social stakeholder engagement and governance initiatives, but then also consider including and highlighting that throughout your investor presentation. There have been some that have considered including it on an investor earnings call. I think if it's relevant to the earnings discussion and trends that the company is seeing in the industry or for their organization, certainly if it's material, then that is something that, yes, they should include on the earnings call. I'm not quite sure that companies are willing to go full-scale earnings/ESG calls yet. I think there's horses for courses, to use a phrase, and earnings is still earnings, but certainly if there are relevant and material ESG disclosures, those should be included on the ESG calls or on the earnings calls as well.
Yeah, I actually have a separate vid guide about what a quarterly earnings call with E&S embodied in it looks like. And there's only one or two companies doing that right now, but a link to that vid guide is beneath this. So do companies typically actively seek feedback on these reports from investors to help them improve the report, for their next time around?
I think more and more now. It was interesting. 2 years ago, I did some research with the heads of governance and the heads of responsible investing across the world, just contacts that I had had for a long time, to get their input on what they saw as the most material areas for disclosure across the board for organizations. This was before SASB, the 77 industry sub-industry guidelines were codified. And what they told me was it's a little bit about the chicken and the egg at that time. So they were asking companies to disclose what was material to them, but the companies, the issuers, were saying to investors, well, tell me what's material to you. And so it went in a circular argument for a little bit back then. I think more and more now it's becoming mainstream for organizations to have these conversations with investors, because certainly investors outside the United States are fairly facile with ESG related questions and disclosures. They adopted it, and in some instances countries have mandated focus on ESG disclosures. The Netherlands and Scandinavian countries in particular. And also now embedded with State Street and BlackRock and Vanguard and other institutions, T. Rowe, TIA, CREF, The portfolio managers are now more facile in the US, are more facile and trained on what to look for with respect to ESG because of mandates from within those organizations. And so I think conversations are becoming more mainstream and being woven into the discussions between an investor relations officer and a portfolio manager, a CFO and a CEO and a portfolio manager. Whereas 2 years ago, it was still both parties trying to figure out how they would engage with each other and what was important. And, well, you tell me what's material. Well, you tell me what's material to you. I think now we've got great frameworks in place with GRI and with SASB. You've got the 5 organizations coming together to try to codify a framework for reporting. The latest disclosure 2 weeks ago. We'll see how that comes out. But all of these are now guiding companies to be able to better identify disclosures that are specific for their organizations.
And then every company is different and industry by industry. So some industries, the employees might be really interested in E&S issues. Some might be disinterested. So how might companies market, once they produce a report, what they're doing to their own employees? That might be part of their own internal strategy to really get employees buying in, or maybe they're just trying to educate employees about what the company is doing. What do companies typically do there?
Yeah, we advise, and we have seen when companies embark on the ESG program that when they get to a certain point where they're about to launch their ESG initiative, whether it be through a corporate sustainability report or an ESG report, whether it be a relaunch of their website with ESG on it, that those organizations actually roll that out through the company and make sure that all employees understand the initiative, all employees can ask questions about the initiative, that it really needs to be tied to a company's vision, mission, and values, or purpose, the purpose statement, and that the employees need to understand that enough so that it becomes embedded as part of the culture. That if you're able to achieve that, and one way to do that is through town hall meetings. A lot of companies do quarterly town hall meetings where employees are able to interact virtually now. That's becoming even more and more mainstream and even more important because of the pandemic and anti-racism, the racial crisis that's occurring in this country, been occurring, but is continuing to occurring. And in the forefront, employees have questions and they want to understand their company's stance on some of these issues like never before. And so I think interacting with your employees, rolling out your ESG initiatives and continuing that training, including new hire orientation, making sure that your new hires understand your company's vision, mission, values, purpose, and that they understand what your ESG initiatives are, what you'll tolerate, what you won't tolerate, as you've taken a stance as an organization.
And so when it comes to a company's brand, embedding social justice messaging, climate change to customers, potential customers, that seems to be important. So how do companies market their ESG report to accommodate customers?
Mm-hmm. First of all, it has to be part of your ethos as an organization. So it can't just be about getting a good score or about marketing something. You really have to be living those values and living those ESG beliefs and actions on a day-to-day basis as an organization. That's where companies fall short, is where there's the disconnect between what they're saying and what they're doing. So having that as context from a customer basis, many customers actually are asking for companies to sign a code of conduct or sign a code of ethics. In certain organizations, if you're in an industry and an organization where you're dealing with requests for proposal, so RFPs, those RFPs often have questions embedded in them that touch upon environmental, social, and governance issues, and also ask for a code of ethics or a code of conduct to be signed. Organizations themselves are asking their suppliers to sign or comply with a code of conduct or code of ethics. And so that, I think, is the conversation, depending on the organization and its industry. That seems to be more ubiquitous now. In certain industries and for certain organizations, I've been in situations with former companies where, and seeing it with clients, where customers have come to the organization and said, we like what you're doing from an ESG standpoint. We want to partner with you on a project as part of our relationship. And so that actually gets embedded into, whether it be community engagement or whether it be an environmental commitment and an approach to a project regarding climate change. You are seeing more and more of those customer supplier relationships and those partnering opportunities as well.
Yeah, this is such a fast moving area that it even to just the marketing aspect of it, it's hard to keep your hands around. You might have to change your messaging every couple of months, really, to keep up.
And I think again, I go back to the website, I go back to the proxy cDNA. Your customers clearly look at the website, and so that's a great opportunity for disclosure. And in many instances, they will look at the proxy cDNA to see what your company is about, to see how your board, the board oversight and fiduciary responsibility and ESG disclosures. And so don't discount the fact that your customers and your competitors are actually listening to earnings calls and looking at all of your materials as well.
Great stuff, Sally. Thank you.
Thank you, Brock.